When you think of some of the biggest licenses that have appeared in Dead by Daylight, Alien might come to mind for a lot of you. It was one of the most requested chapters ever, being the 4th most voted according to a community poll made by DVD Leaks, only rivaled by hype beasts like Friday the 13th and Five Nights at Freddy's. So to finally have such a titan in cinema history, one of the most iconic monster designs ever made, and one of the most recognizable female protagonists in film media, should have been an amazing success for the game. But surprisingly, this is not the case. The reviews of this DLC are still stuck on mixed on Steam. Ellen Ripley sits as the 7th least played character in the game, and the Xenomorph only has a 2% pick rate, even less than the Pig or characters that came after it, like Chucky or the Unknown, and it's not because Xenomorph is considered weak. On the contrary, the Alien is rated consistently as an A-tier killer, and in terms of player retention, the Alien chapter brought less people than the All Things Wicked DLC did, which was an original. So what happened? Was the Alien chapter a failure? Before we dive into the content of the DLC, like we usually do, the Alien chapter suffered from a curious problem that as of today, is the only and hopefully the last time this has happened. The actual reason behind the mixed review of the DLC in the store is not because of the survivor, nor the killer, nor the map. The actual reason as to why is the price. If you take a look at the price of this DLC without any sale, it will amount to around $12 instead of the 7 a normal DLC costs. Now this is not out of the ordinary, as the Resident Evil DLCs, Stranger Things, and Tools of Torment all cost $12 too, but those came with 2 survivors. For the Alien chapter, you only got Ellen Ripley and the Alien. The reason this DLC cost more is because the devs attempted to make the chapter packs more costly by adding a cosmetic extra for when you purchase it, which is something they did with Nicolas Cage, the previous DLC. Now for Nicolas, this was not that big of a deal, as you could purchase a $5 Oryx Cells pack and buy him for cheaper in the in-game store. But for this chapter, this was not possible. You had to pay $10 at minimum in order to get both Ellen as well as the Alien. Now for those of you that are privileged, $12 might not seem like much, despite this being almost double of the price of a normal DLC for the same gameplay content. And if you don't think $12 is a lot, consider donating to my channel with a super thanks or leaving a like. But for a lot of people, this is way too much to spend on a chapter, especially those players from countries where the minimum wage is significantly less than that in the USA. This was clearly done by the core pursuits of behavior in order to milk the wallets of their players, even though their cosmetic store is already expensive enough, since the Xenomorph came with one legendary cosmetic which already costs $15 at base, and you know fans are buying it. So this was met with a huge pushback, one so huge that Behavior announced on their next livestream that they will be removing the new pricing bundle deal for future chapters. But the damage was done, as the chapter is still $12 to this day unless you get it on sale. And one last thing before we talk about the chapter itself, I do want to mention one thing that is important in the context of this video. Back when the Alien chapter released, the community was in a state of what they like to call sci-fi fatigue. And this was because the previous 2 chapters before the Alien were both from the sci-fi genre, with Skull Merchant's high-tech power being the first of its kind in DVD, and then the End Transmission chapter, which went fully onto the far future setting. In a way, I feel like we are now on another fatigue in the community related to licensed content, but that's a topic for another video. Let's talk about the chapter itself now, starting with what I think is personally the biggest problem of this DLC, Ellen Ripley. It's impossible to talk about the Alien franchise without mentioning Ellen Ripley, one of the most badass characters in cinema history, and a lot of the community wanted to play as her in Dead by Daylight. In fact, considering the amount of horror licenses we have in the game, it might be shocking to realize that Ellen is the second final girl in the game, as the only other one is Laurie Strode. We don't have Nancy from Nightmare on Elm Street, Kirsty Cotton from Hellraiser, or Sidney Prescott from Scream. So to have another one, and as iconic as Ellen, was fantastic. An iconic survivor and a good selection of cosmetics is everything one needs to become a hit. And if you don't believe me, ask Cheryl, Steve, or Nancy Maines. However, when the chapter was finally showcased and we got a first look at Ellen, something was not right. For the first time in literal years, we didn't get the likeness of the actor in the game, and this problem was something unique for this DLC, as Alan Wake and the recent Lara Croft both have the exact same faces as they have in the source. It seemed like we went back in time when the licensed survivors were custom made by behavior, like it was the case with Laurie, Tap, or Quentin. This was a huge deal breaker to a lot of the community, and to this day we don't know why this is the case, as her likeness was in the Fortnite collab. A lot of memes were made of Ellen's appearance in the game, as a lot considered her to look weird and not at all like Sigourney Weaver. Her hair looked bad, especially when compared to the newer hairs from survivors like Alan or Lara, and by far what is the biggest issue, at least for me, is that Ellen Ripley is tall in real life, whereas in DVD, Ellen looks small just like the rest of female survivors. Obviously this was done because the only way they could make a tall female is by reusing the male animations like they did with AS3, but it's still sad for Alien fans. And in terms of cosmetics, yet again, we went back in time. Ellen only came with 2 cosmetic sets, which already limits her massively in terms of self-expression and customization, and if we know something from characters like Gabriel and Hattie, is that good cosmetics can make or break a survivor's popularity, especially when some licensed survivors like Ash, the Stranger Things survivors, or Nicolas Cage, even Alan Wake, who came after her, actually have unlinked sets as outfits. And in terms of perks, hers left a lot to be desired. Lucky Star is an interesting concept let down by the numbers it comes with. Chemical Trap is a really cool and unique idea, which still falls flat compared to Blast Mine or Champion of Light. And Light Footed is by far the only perk with solid potential, which again is limited due to its arbitrary conditions. I can guarantee nobody has bought Ellen for her perks besides the completionists like myself, and you won't see these perks being used outside of adepts or very niche builds. So, as many Ellen Ripley fans can agree, she as a survivor left a lot to be desired when compared to other iconic characters who, even if they didn't have cosmetic potential, still came with interesting perks like flashbangs or reassurance. But for most viewers, the actual sauce of the DLC is always the killer, as survivors are just cosmetics after all. So let's talk about the Xenomorph. Was it the cause for this DLC feeling mediocre? When many of you think of the Xenomorph, what we expected as a power is the perfect organism, a being that hunts you down in a smart and cunning way, a stealth killer able to track you wherever you are, the eggs with the face huggers everywhere you walk. Even if you hurt it, it will damage you with its acid blood, and once it gets you, you will get impregnated with a chest burster. Well, the actual power we got in the game was, for a lot of players, a disappointment. The Xenomorph is able to navigate the map with a system of tunnels that it can access on control stations all over the map, usually found near generators. Inside these tunnels, the Xeno can detect survivor footsteps without them knowing, so the tracking part is indeed integrated in its kit. However, I want to talk about the tunnels itself first, because it was the first time in a while that I was actually surprised with how a power was integrated into the game. The tunnels actually exist in-game as a physical space. You are not just teleporting around like the Dredge or the Demo's portals. You can navigate them freely, your movement is not limited, and they are always there. It fits thematically very well, as it shows that not a single map is safe from the Xenomorph, as each time you play with it, all hooks become the Xeno ones with the alien resin, showing that they make every map their territory. I think this is by far the best part of this killer and an absolute 10 out of 10. And here is where the problems with its kit begin. Now you might think that the Xenomorph would be a stealth killer, and while this is true inside the tunnels and also without cosmetics, Xeno is one of the most silent and hard killers to see in the game, but stealth is not a part of its kit at all. After some time, or by charging it on the tunnels, Xenomorph will enter a crawler state, where it gets on all fours, the turn radius is decreased a bit, and you get access to a new attack. This is the tail attack, which is the alien using its tail like a spear to hurt survivors in front of it, very similar to the Nemesis tentacle in terms of reach, but it works in a different way. This is its anti-loop power, and the bread and butter you have to learn in order to become good with the Xenomorph. This attack did not feel good in the PTB, as it was clunky to use with a weird hitbox which was later improved with the chapter release, too much even. And this is by far the biggest complaint the community had regarding Xenomorph. What was once a fantastic creature capable of hunting survivors efficiently is just a tail attack in the game which in a counterplay sense works like Nemesis Whip. And a lot of survivors were unhappy with this because instead of learning the counterplay, which we will get to soon, they just gave up because for them this was a lose-lose scenario. And I can understand that, because if you don't use the counterplay the game gives you against Xenomorph, the crawler stance of the Xenomorph is very strong. In fact, Xenomorph can attack with a basic attack instead of the tail whenever it wants to, making fakes mostly useless against it. And for some reason, it also could get bloodlust while chasing you in the crawler state. The biggest problem was the delay of the tail attack, whereas for a lot of characters like the Huntress, Wesker or the Hillbilly, where their attacks had a charge period that made a distinct sound to allow survivors to plan ahead, the Xenomorph's tail attack was basically instant, so at any point while chasing you, the Xenomorph could down you and you would feel like it was simply impossible to react to. And if you did try to react to it, Xeno could just basic attack you with a 0 penalty and cooldown. So for survivors, it was a lose-lose situation. And this is without taking into account that when the alien released live, the missed cooldown recovery speed as well as the speed you moved was so fast that you were basically not punished at all for missing an attack with your tail. It was absurdly busted and quickly nerfed because everyone agreed that it was simply unfair when compared to other killers. If you miss your power as a killer, you need to be punished for it. There were no facehuggers or eggs to slow down survivors around the map. No chestburster Mori either, even though I really enjoyed the Mori we have in game. And the acid blood was exclusive to an iridescent add-on. In a way, its gameplay didn't feel like the perfect organism. It was kinda, again, like Nemesis. In the original source, the characters were significantly more interesting than they are in the games. You couldn't crawl on walls or jump around and feel the massive speed the Xenomorph has, like in the promotional trailer. Instead, you crawl on all fours almost constantly, which for some players this was annoying because it made the POV lower to the ground, which is something not everyone enjoys as a killer. And how about the stealth element? Well, let's talk about this, because survivors had a complete counter to any stealth plays the Xenomorph tried, as they had a tracking tool base kit, the flamethrower turrets. Survivors that interact with a control station will get access to a deployable flamethrower turret, which will burn the Xenomorph whenever it's close to it, removing its access to the tail attack if burned enough. It also comes with a tracking component, as the turrets will beep faster the closer the Xenomorph was to it. So if you try to play in a stealthy way, it didn't matter, as the turrets would give away your location at all times. And the flamethrower usage was the biggest counterplay to this killer. The issue is that many players simply deployed the turrets near the control stations, when this was a huge mistake, as anytime the Xenomorph exits a tunnel, the turrets will deactivate, allowing it to break them. This was bugged in the PTB, however, and you could only break the turrets after they reactivated again, making them clunky to play against. And this is the biggest issue of its kit. The turrets require thinking and strategy in order to be used. This strategy being placing them in spots where you will lead the Xenomorph to make it lose time and force to break them, giving you distance in chase. However, for most survivors, thinking is not part of their gameplay experience when playing DBD. And what else can we expect, since Sadako's counterplay is to literally interact with the glowing white TVs near your gen, and yet barely anyone does it. So, the power is not explained for casuals and beginners, it's complicated for them, and this leads to the vast majority of survivors to not know what to do against it, making Xeno feel like an unbeatable killer, because the counterplay to one very strong anti-loop power is very weird for new players. But what happens in those games where survivors do know how to play against the Xenomorph? Well, let's talk about how annoying and overwhelming the turrets are for the players, especially those with sensitivity problems that can lead to migraines. The Xenomorph's groans are very loud anytime it gets hurt, and combine that with the massive beeping of the turrets as well as the intense sound effect of the flames, and on top of that combined with the chase music, and this is sensory overload on the level of the artillery strikes in World War I. This feels absolutely terrible for most players, especially it feels annoying, and so a lot of players simply don't want to play the Xenomorph. This is something that happens with the Dredge even, as some players get triggered by the intense voices happening during Nightfall. So not only do you get counterplayed in-game, you also get counterplayed in real life. And I did mention the chase music now, and I wanted to talk about it a bit. The chase theme of the Xenomorph in the PTB was so horrible that it was changed on the live release due to the amount of dishwasher, washing machine memes it received. Just take a listen yourself and imagine this music while you're getting bombarded with the turrets. And finally, add-on-wise, most Xenomorph mains can agree that this killer is pretty boring. While they are different and not on the level of Pyramid Head, Xenomorph suffers from the problem that Knight or Booba used to suffer, and that is that one of their add-ons, in specific the Lambert Star Map and Emergency Helmet, are so good and cheap that it feels almost necessary to play with them, and the rest don't change its kit in a drastic way, as most of them focus on the tunnel aspect and turrets instead of the tail attack. This makes the Xenomorph play almost the exact same on most matches, like the Deathslinger or the Nemesis. Outside of its kit, we also have to talk about the Xenomorph's perks, and the fact that Ultimate Weapon was by far the best tracking perk ever introduced in the game, making it pay to win. Rapid Brutality was also a very hyped perk, and to this day it's a perk I use on some of my builds. And then we have Alien Instinct, which is not that bad, but it's bad. So perks are for sure not the reason this character was not played or talked about in the community. So in short, the DLC started horribly due to sci-fi fatigue as well as the price being inflated. Ellen didn't look like Ellen and was mediocre overall, and the Xenomorph was not what the fans expected, as well as it was clunky for those that enjoyed it and very annoying for survivors, tainting this chapter negatively compared to other past licenses. But was this negativity deserved? In my opinion, the actual reason for this chapter's failure, in between quotations, is not the DLC itself. While everything I pointed out was criticism that a lot of the community shared for this chapter, I have to disagree with some of it. For starters, I think Nostromo is one of the best licensed maps we have ever gotten in the game in terms of visuals and balance, and the Easter eggs on it are by far the best out of any map they ever made. The interactable gas pipes, the custom item, Jonesy appearing out of lockers, the facehugger jumpscare. It was clear that a lot of love was put in this map. And the Xenomorph is honestly kinda fun to play, and the cosmetics are some of the best licensed killers ever got, as we have 2 legendary cosmetics that change sound and animations, the very rare which is on the level of a legendary in terms of visual change, and Grid Xenomorph is one of my favorite rare cosmetics ever introduced, super clean and super iconic. Of course, this is a very subjective opinion, and everyone is entitled to call this chapter underwhelming or bad. I am just sharing my view since this is my video on my channel. I think what a lot of people seem to miss from this period of DBD is that the real problem was found outside of the DLC itself. During this time, the meta for survivors was absolutely busted, featuring the game-breaking perk called Made for This, which is one of the strongest perks ever introduced into the game. and made the game very miserable for low tier killers while being basically useless against the top dogs. We cannot forget the fact that female vaults were broken for a long period of time, making the game unplayable for survivors as it affected their matches constantly. This was a huge bug that the community could simply not ignore. And let's not forget that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game, the DVD supposed killer, also released in August of this period, so a lot of players simply lost their hype for DVD and instead they went to play this game, which explains the lower player count around this time. In my opinion, the Alien chapter is a solid 7 out of 10, as it does have its problems that we cannot ignore, but at the same time, to claim this chapter was bad is just wrong, and there was a lot of effort put to it, and in terms of Alien's likeness, I am sure that this is not Behavior's fault, and of course, they would have wanted to get Sigourney Weaver, so the problem is just out of their reach, and it's unfair to criticize them for something that they probably fought hard to get, but simply couldn't. We cannot forget that this is an IP owned by Disney, so anything they say goes, just like how Fortnite cannot get a lightsaber as a pickaxe even though the community keeps asking for it. The true problem of this chapter was that it was a 7 out of 10 release in a period of time where we needed a 10 out of 10, as proven by the hype of the All Things Wicked chapter. I hope you had fun watching this video, and I would really appreciate a like and maybe a sub if you're feeling generous. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.